The quiet hum of the morning fog seemed to swallow the streets of the small town. Sophie Carter, a 15-year-old girl with a mess of brown curls and a notebook clutched in her hand, made her way home from school. The usual crowd of bustling students had already dispersed, and the neighborhood felt unusually empty. She passed the familiar streets, her thoughts elsewhere, until something caught her eye, a worn-down animal shelter tucked between two large buildings that she had never noticed before. Sophie had always loved animals, but her family wasn't in a position to adopt a pet. Still, the sign on the faded green door of the shelter tugged at her heart. "Adopt a friend today," it read in cracked lettering. She hesitated, then pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges almost echoing in the quiet street. Inside, the air smelled faintly of bleach and old newspaper. Rows of cages lined the walls, each containing animals of all shapes and sizes: cats, rabbits, and dogs of all breeds. But in the farthest corner of the room, Sophie's eyes were drawn to a large cage that sat in near solitude. A German shepherd, its fur matted and disheveled, lay curled in a corner of the cage. Its eyes, sharp and watchful, met Sophie's with an intensity that stopped her in her tracks. "Hey there," Sophie whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl, he just stared. Sophie felt a chill run down her spine, not of fear, but something she couldn't quite place. There was something about him, something old and wise, as if he had seen too much for a dog of his age. The shelter worker, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, came up beside Sophie. "He's been here a while," she said, her voice flat, almost detached. "His name's Max. He was a K-9 officer, part of the police force. But he doesn't talk about it much." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. "A police dog?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity. The worker nodded. "Yeah, but something happened. His handler was killed in an operation. Max. He's been left behind ever since. Doesn't trust anyone." Sophie leaned closer, her fingers gently curling around the bars of the cage. Max stood, his muscular frame moving with surprising grace despite his scruffy appearance. Sophie's heart ached for him. He was a warrior who had lost everything: his handler, his purpose. Now, here he was, abandoned, just like so many others. The shelter worker sighed. "He's been through a lot. We're not sure what to do with him anymore. He's too trained to be adopted by just anyone. Too dangerous for some people. But I guess if you're willing to give him a chance, maybe he'll open up." Sophie didn't need to hear more. She knew what she had to do. "I'll take him," she said firmly, her decision made in an instant. The worker looked at her in surprise. "You sure? He's not an easy dog to handle. He's not like a regular pet." "I know," Sophie replied, her voice soft but resolute. "But I think he needs someone who understands. I've never had a dog before, but I'll figure it out." The worker hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But remember, he's been through some serious trauma. He might not trust you at first." Sophie smiled, a little uncertain but determined. "I'll do my best." The following day, Sophie returned to the shelter with her mother, who reluctantly agreed to the adoption after some convincing. Sophie's father, on the other hand, was less enthusiastic, arguing that they were unprepared for the responsibility. But Sophie's heart was set. She felt a deep connection with Max, as if she had been waiting for this moment her whole life. When they arrived at the shelter, Sophie rushed to the back where Max was waiting, his eyes watching her every move. The worker led them to his cage, where Max stood silently, the faintest flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Max," Sophie whispered softly, crouching in front of the cage. "I'm Sophie. I'm going to take care of you now." Max didn't bark. He didn't wag his tail. He simply stood, his expression unreadable, as if he was sizing Sophie up. Sophie held her breath, hoping for some sign of acknowledgement. But then, without warning, Max stepped forward, his strong paws landing softly on the ground. He pressed his nose to the bars, his gaze fixed on Sophie's. And for the first time since arriving at the shelter, he gave a low, almost imperceptible whine, a sound filled with so much sorrow it made Sophie's heart ache. Sophie's hand reached out, trembling slightly. She stroked Max's muzzle through the bars, her fingers brushing against his coarse fur. "I promise, Max. I won't let anyone hurt you again." The worker stood nearby, watching quietly. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into," she murmured under her breath, though Sophie didn't hear her. As Sophie and her mother left the shelter, Max walking beside them, a strange sense of calm settled over Sophie. She didn't know what awaited them, what kind of challenges Max would bring, but she felt an undeniable connection to him. She knew somehow that their lives were about to change forever. Max, however, was not just any dog. Sophie's heart raced with excitement and apprehension as she glanced at him. There was something behind those dark eyes, something important. Max wasn't just a stray or a regular dog in need of a home. No, he was more than that. Sophie could feel it. And little did she know, this was only the beginning. As they got home, Max stayed close to Sophie. There was no barking or growling. Instead, he observed everything with careful attention, as though he was on high alert. His eyes never strayed from her, even when Sophie's mother called him over to his new bed. The night passed quietly. Sophie lay in bed, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that Max wasn't just adjusting to a new home. He was waiting. Waiting for something. Suddenly, a sharp bark pierced the silence of the house. Sophie's eyes snapped open, her heart leaping in her chest. Max was standing in the hallway, staring intently toward the back door. "Sophie," his eyes seemed to say. "Something's not right." The next few days passed with Sophie slowly growing more accustomed to life with Max. His presence in her room, in the house, was both comforting and unsettling. He followed her everywhere, down the stairs to the kitchen, to her study desk, where he sat quietly at her feet as she did her homework. There was an unspoken bond between them, something deeper than a typical pet-owner relationship. Max seemed to anticipate her every move, his eyes always tracking her, his ears twitching at the slightest sound. But there were also moments that left Sophie on edge. At night, Max would sit by the window, staring out into the darkness, his eyes narrowed as though he were waiting for something. It wasn't unusual for dogs to bark at the night, but the way Max acted felt different. He wasn't just guarding the house, he was on high alert. One evening after dinner, Sophie was sitting on the couch with her mother when she noticed Max again, this time staring at the backyard through the glass door. His hackles were raised, and he was growling softly, his body taut with tension. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the usual sound of Max's calm, protective nature, it was something else, something primal. "Max." Sophie called softly, but the dog didn't respond. He continued to growl, his focus unwavering. Sophie stood and walked toward him. "Max, what's wrong?" she whispered, kneeling beside him. The dog's response was immediate. He darted to the door and began scratching at it, his nails clicking against the wooden floor. Sophie could feel the intensity in the air, the sense that something was very wrong. Her mother, noticing the change in Sophie's demeanor, stood up and walked over. "What's going on, sweetie?" she asked, looking at Max, who now had his ears flat against his head. "Mom, something's out there," Sophie said, her voice shaking slightly. "Max is acting weird. He's never done this before." Her mother hesitated, then glanced out the window. The backyard was dark, with only the faint glow of a street lamp on the corner illuminating the edge of their property. The trees rustled gently in the breeze, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. "Maybe it's just a squirrel or something," her mother said dismissively. "Max is just a dog, Sophie. He's probably reacting to something small." But Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. Something about the way Max was reacting, it wasn't like the other times when he had been playful or curious. There was a danger lurking, just beyond the reach of the light. She opened the door cautiously, letting Max lead the way. The cool evening air hit her skin as she stepped outside, but she didn't pay attention to the chill. Her focus was on Max, who stood motionless at the edge of the backyard, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. "Max." Sophie kellete again, stepping forward. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught her eye. She turned quickly, but whatever it was disappeared into the shadows, leaving nothing but the rustling of leaves behind. Max's growl turned into a deep, menacing bark, and he lunged forward, pulling Sophie with him. "Max!" Sophie shouted, trying to regain control, but Max's strength was overpowering. He was intent on chasing whatever had been lurking in the dark. Sophie's heart raced. She had never seen Max like this before. He was acting as though something was after them, something dangerous. She tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop, his body tense and focused, his eyes darting around as if expecting an attack from all sides. "Max, stop," Sophie cried, tugging at his collar, but he pulled away and bounded toward the far side of the yard. Sophie followed, her breath coming faster as she chased him. The night was thick with the unknown, and the tension in the air was suffocating. Just then, Sophie heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, purposeful, and coming from the woods at the edge of the yard. Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't alone. Max's growl intensified as he stood in front of Sophie, his body rigid, ready to defend her at any cost. Sophie's eyes darted to the shadows, trying to make out what was there. "Vostere." Sophie called out, her voice quivering with fear. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, cloaked, and moving with unnerving speed. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest, and Max let out a bark that was both a warning and a challenge. The figure stopped just outside the beam of the street lamp, his face hidden beneath the brim of a dark hat. Sophie's mind raced. Could this be the person Max had been sensing? "Stay back," Sophie demanded, her voice shaking but firm. She was terrified, but she wasn't going to let this stranger near Max. The figure didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out something that glinted in the dim light, a small metallic object that Sophie couldn't quite make out. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Max's growl was low, but it was clear, he was ready to strike if necessary. Sophie stepped forward, her hands trembling but determined. "Max, stay calm. Stay with me." The figure raised the object, and Sophie's heart stopped. It wasn't a weapon, but something else, a small device that emitted a sharp, high-pitched sound that Sophie could feel deep in her chest. Max recoiled, shaking his head violently as if trying to escape the sound. "Max!" Sophie screamed, reaching for him, but the dog staggered back, disoriented by the noise. The figure began to step forward, taking advantage of Max's temporary disorientation. In that moment, Sophie realized the truth. This wasn't just some random stranger. Whoever this person was, they were after Max. With all the strength she could muster, Sophie rushed forward and grabbed Max's collar, pulling him back into the safety of the house. The figure didn't chase them, but Sophie could feel his eyes on her, cold and calculating. She slammed the door shut and locked it, breathing heavily. "Who was that?" Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. Max's panting was the only sound in the room as he leaned against her, seeking comfort. But Sophie knew, whoever had been out there, they hadn't just been looking for a dog. They had been looking for Max. The next few days were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something had shifted. Max was still acting strangely, refusing to leave Sophie's side, and his sharp, cautious eyes never seemed to leave the windows. Every time a car drove by or a footstep echoed down the street, he'd growl low, warning of a danger no one else could see. Sophie's parents, though concerned, dismissed her worries as overreaction. Her father told her she was just imagining things, that Max was likely just adjusting to a new home. Her mother, more understanding, suggested they take Max to the local vet to make sure he was physically all right, but Sophie knew it was more than that. The night after the figure in the yard, Sophie couldn't sleep. Max was beside her as always, lying on the floor next to her bed, his eyes wide open, his body tense. He refused to rest. His breathing was steady, but Sophie could feel the weight of his anxiety. It wasn't just about protecting her, it was about something much more pressing. At 3 a.m., Sophie heard it again, the sound of footsteps outside her window. Her heart pounded as she reached for her phone. She typed a quick message to Ethan Blake, the journalist she had met earlier that week during a community event about local crime. Ethan had been curious about Max's past as a K-9 officer, but he had no idea how deep the situation had become. Sophie hesitated before hitting send, knowing she had no concrete evidence of what was going on, just an overwhelming feeling that Max was more than just a retired police dog.
Ethan, Sophie, are you okay? Sophie, Someones Wettchen US.
Max has been acting strange. He's not just a dog, Ethan. He's in danger.
Ethan, stay calm.
We'll figure this out.
Call them if anything happens. Don't confront them alone.
Sophie didn't know if she could stay calm. Her fingers trembled as she typed back.
Sophie, I'll call you if you need help.
I don't know what to do anymore. As soon as the message was sent, Sophie moved quietly to the window. Max growled low beside her, sensing her every movement. She looked out and saw nothing at first, just the dark street lit by the occasional street lamp. But then there, at the edge of the street, a shadow moved, and Sophie's breath caught in her throat. Max's body tensed, his growls deepening into something more threatening. Sophie's heart raced. The figure from the other night was back. She grabbed her phone again, this time dialing Ethan's number.
Ze von rang onse, twisse, en teen, noting.
Max barked furiously, his voice sharp and commanding, as if warning the figure. Sophie's hand shot out to grab him, but Max pushed her back, his muscles taut and strong, refusing to be held back.
Max, no.
Sophie hissed, panic rising in her chest. She had to think quickly. If she went outside, she might be walking straight into danger. But if she stayed inside, she might be putting both herself and Max at risk.
The doorbell rang. Sophie frotze. The schillen her spine spriet like wildfire.
It was too late to hide. Whoever was out there had already found them. Max barked again, this time with urgency. He sprang to his feet and charged for the door, his paws heavy on the floorboards. Sophie hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. She could hear the voice of the stranger through the thin walls, his words muffled but unmistakable.
Sophie Carter, open up.
We know you're in there, the voice called, smooth but menacing.
We just want to talk. Sophie's pulse quickened.
The voice was too familiar. It was the same man who had appeared in her yard just days before. Panic clawed at her chest. She couldn't let him in. She knew what was at stake.
Max, sit.
Sophie ordered, but Max was beyond listening. He was already at the door, his eyes fixated on the knob, ready to break through anything that stood between him and the threat outside. Sophie grabbed the nearest object, a metal lamp from her desk, as a last line of defense.
The knocking grey luder, more insistent.
Sophie's hand shook as she pressed herself against the wall, trying to think of what to do next. She couldn't wait any longer. Max had already made it clear he wasn't going to let this go. Sophie opened the door just a crack, enough to peek outside. The figure was standing in the shadow of the porch, his posture rigid, almost like a soldier. He wasn't alone. 2 other men stood behind him, their faces obscured by dark sunglasses. All 3 were dressed in black, their presence intimidating and deliberate. Max isn't just a dog, is he? Sophie said, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't friendly. It was a warning. No, the man said, his tone low and deliberate. He's much more than that. And you need to give him to us. Now.
Sophie's mind raced.
Her hands trembled, but she didn't back away. She had no idea who these men were, but she knew they were dangerous. This wasn't a simple case of pet adoption gone wrong. Max's past had caught up with them, and Sophie was in deeper than she had ever imagined. Max let out a growl, louder this time, a sound that could only be described as a challenge. Sophie looked down at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. I won't give him to you, Sophie said, her voice firm now. He's mine, and I'll protect him. The man's smile faded, his eyes hardening. You don't understand, do you? This isn't just about a dog. It's about something much bigger. Max knows things he shouldn't, and people are coming for him. And for you. Before Sophie could respond, Max lunged, his body a blur of motion. The figure barely had time to react as Max slammed into him, knocking him off balance. Sophie stepped back instinctively, her heart racing as she watched Max defend her with all the strength and fury of the trained K9 he once was. But Sophie knew this wouldn't be the last time they'd face these men. Whatever Max had been through in his past, it was clear now, he was a target. And Sophie had no choice but to join the fight. The crash of the door against the figure sent a shiver down Sophie's spine. Max was relentless, his instincts kicking in with the precision of a soldier in a combat zone. The man stumbled back, losing his footing as Max pinned him to the ground. Sophie stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. The other 2 men behind the first one reached for their weapons, but Sophie didn't wait to see what they would do next.
Max, no.
Sophie shouted, trying to command him to stop. But Max didn't listen. His focus was locked on the man beneath him, who was now struggling to free himself from the dog's vice-like grip. Sophie knew Max was only trying to protect her, but this had gone too far. These men were dangerous, and they wouldn't stop until they had Max, or worse. Before she could react, the second man reached out and pulled something from his belt, a small device with buttons. He pressed one and suddenly, a high-pitched sound filled the air, vibrating through Sophie's bones. Max froze instantly, his growl stopping abruptly as his ears flattened against his head. He whimpered in confusion and pain, stepping back as if the sound was too much for him to bear. Sophie rushed forward, but the men quickly recovered. The one who had been knocked down by Max now stood, pulling out a gun from inside his jacket. "Move and I'll shoot," he said, his voice calm but firm, like he had been in this position many times before. Sophie's heart skipped a beat, and her legs shook. She couldn't let them take Max. She couldn't lose him. The thought of what might happen to him if they succeeded made her stomach twist with fear. "Please," Sophie said, her voice trembling as she took a step back. "What do you want with him? He's just a dog." The man with the gun glanced at her, his face hard as stone. "He's not just a dog, girl. Max is a key to something much bigger, something the world isn't ready for. We've been looking for him for a long time. And now, we're here to make sure he never gets away again." Sophie's mind raced. "What are you talking about?"
Max.
"He's just been with me. He's only been trying to protect me." The man's eyes narrowed, and his grip on the gun tightened.
You have no idea, do you?
Max was part of a government program. They trained him to infiltrate and expose the darkest secrets of the highest powers. He saw things, horrible things that nobody should ever know about. The organization that runs this project isn't just some shady corporation. They control governments, they run covert operations, and they'll do whatever it takes to make sure nothing gets out. And Max knows everything. Sophie stood frozen, her breath coming in short gasps. This was madness. Max. A part of some government program? But it all made sense now. The way he reacted to certain sounds, the way he was always on alert, it was all part of his training. He wasn't just a dog. He was a weapon, a tool of war, and they were coming to reclaim him. Max, still clearly shaken from the device's frequency, looked up at Sophie, his eyes filled with confusion and pain. Sophie's heart broke for him. He didn't deserve this. None of it was his fault. "I don't care what he knows."
Sophie yelled, stepping forward again.
"I won't let you take him. He's mine. He's my dog, and I'm not letting you take him back to whatever horrible place you came from." The man with the gun raised an eyebrow. "You think you can stop us? We're just getting started. We have agents everywhere, and you're already too far into this. If you think you can protect him, you're wrong."
Sophie's mind raced.
She couldn't just stand there. She had to do something. Then she remembered, Ethan. She had told him what was happening. Maybe he could help. Maybe he had more information, or maybe he knew someone who could help them escape.
"Max."
Sophie called, her voice full of desperation. "We have to go. We have to get out of here." Max, seemingly understanding the urgency, growled low again, and this time, Sophie saw the fire return in his eyes. He wasn't just a passive victim in all of this. He was part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous, and he wasn't going to let these men control him anymore. Before either of the men could react, Max lunged at the man with the gun, knocking him off balance and sending the weapon flying across the room. Sophie, her heart pounding, grabbed the gun before the man could recover, aiming it at him, though her hands shook. "Don't come any closer," Sophie warned, her voice fierce despite her fear.
"Il shoot. I swear he will."
The man held up his hands in surrender, a wicked smirk on his face. "You really think you can protect yourself and that dog? You've made a mistake, girl. But it doesn't matter. We'll be back for him." Sophie didn't wait to hear more. With the gun still in her trembling hands, she backed away slowly toward the door, her eyes never leaving the men. She was terrified, but there was something else burning inside her, determination. She had to protect Max, no matter the cost. Max, sensing the urgency, moved quickly to her side, his body still tense but now more focused than ever. The two men didn't make a move as Sophie and Max reached the door. The moment they stepped outside, Sophie slammed the door shut behind them, locking it. She didn't stop to look back. She ran, with Max at her heels, through the backyard, toward the alley that led to the street. She needed to get to Ethan, to find help, to understand the truth behind what Max had been through. As she ran, her mind spun with everything she had just learned. There was no turning back now. Sophie and Max were in this together, and they were going to fight for their survival, no matter what secrets the past held. Sophie didn't stop running. Her lungs burned, and her legs felt like lead as she sprinted down the narrow alley, with Max beside her, his muscular frame powering through the night. The world around them blurred, as though the chaos and danger had become a distant fog. All that mattered now was escaping, and finding help. She reached her phone and dialed Ethan's number again, her fingers trembling as she pressed the screen. The phone rang, and with each second, Sophie's anxiety rose. She needed to speak to him now. There was no time to waste. The threat was closing in, and Max was still the target. Ethan answered on the third ring.
Sophie? Are you okay?
His voice was strained, as if he already knew the seriousness of the situation. I'm fine, but Max isn't. They're after him, after both of us, Sophie gasped, trying to keep her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest.
Ethan, I need your help.
We're being hunted, and I don't know who to trust anymore.
Ethan, what's going on?
Max's growl in the background made Sophie turn to look at him. He was running beside her, alert and focused, as if he already knew what was coming. Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. Listen carefully. I'm coming to get you. Meet me at the abandoned warehouse on the west side of town. It's the only place I know that's safe. Don't go anywhere else, Sophie. Don't trust anyone who shows up after you get there. We'll take it from there. Sophie barely heard the last part of Ethan's message, her mind spinning with thoughts of what to do next. The abandoned warehouse was a dangerous place, a place where people disappeared. But if Ethan was right, it was the only place that could give them a fighting chance. We'll be there, Sophie said, barely able to form the words. Hurry. She hung up and looked at Max. We need to get there now. I don't know what will happen, but I won't let them take you. Not again. Max's response was simple. He barked, his tail stiff behind him, as if understanding the urgency in Sophie's voice. They cut through the streets, moving swiftly as the shadows of the city seemed to close in around them.
Sophie's mind raced.
She couldn't let Max be taken. She couldn't lose him. The secret of his past, the power of the training they had put him through, everything was coming to a head. Minutes later, they arrived at the warehouse, the large crumbling building looming ahead like a forgotten ghost of the city. Sophie's heart pounded as she crept through the broken entrance, her fingers clutching Max's leash tightly. Max walked in front of her, alert, scanning the surroundings as he had done ever since they left home. The door creaked loudly as they entered, and Sophie winced at the sound. They were already inside.
Ethan.
Sophie called out softly, her voice barely louder than a whisper. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Ethan, his face grim and weary. He had his hand on his gun, his eyes scanning the perimeter, looking for any sign of danger. Thank God you made it, Ethan said, his voice strained with urgency. We don't have much time. They know where you are, Sophie. They know everything. If they find you. I won't let them take him, Sophie interrupted, her voice steely with resolve. She looked down at Max, who had stopped beside her, his ears flicking at every sound, his instincts heightened. Ethan nodded, his eyes softening for a moment. We'll figure this out. There's more to this than we realize. They're after Max for a reason, something even worse than what you've seen. Sophie's stomach twisted as she realized what Ethan was implying. What do you mean? What did they train him for? Ethan took a deep breath, his voice low and hesitant. Max wasn't just a K-9 officer. He was part of an illegal government project, a covert operation that developed a series of specially trained dogs to infiltrate criminal organizations, gather intelligence, and eliminate threats. But somewhere along the way, the project went wrong. The people in charge became desperate, and they started using the dogs for darker purposes, things no one should ever be part of. Max growled softly, a sound of frustration and sadness. Sophie's heart broke for him. He had been a tool, a weapon, and now he was a victim of something much bigger than anyone could have imagined.
Max.
I'm so sorry, Sophie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan took a step closer to them. We have a plan, but we need to move fast. There's a secret facility on the outskirts of the city. It's where they kept Max. And where they still keep their other experiments. If we get inside, we can find the truth. We can stop them, Sophie. Sophie's heart raced. The danger was too great, but she knew what she had to do. We're going there, she said, her voice unwavering. We're going to stop them. Ethan hesitated for just a moment before nodding. I'll take point. You stay close, Sophie. And keep Max with you. The three of them moved out of the warehouse into the dark, empty streets. Max led the way, his body tense, his instincts sharp. Sophie's mind spun with the knowledge that they were walking straight into danger. But it didn't matter. She couldn't leave Max. He had become her family, her protector. And now it was her turn to protect him. As they neared the facility, Sophie's pulse quickened. The large high-tech building loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette against the night sky. This was it. The end game. The place where the truth would finally come to light. They broke through the security system and infiltrated the building, moving swiftly through the halls. But they weren't alone. The men who had been after Max, the same ones who had tracked Sophie down, were closing in. Sophie held her breath as they approached the final room, the door standing between them and the truth. Ethan signaled for Max to stay quiet, and with a nod from Sophie, they breached the door. Inside, rows of cages lined the walls, each holding a K9, each with the same lifeless, haunted eyes. The sound of whimpering echoed through the room as the truth revealed itself. Max wasn't the only one. He had been one of many, part of a much larger operation. But it wasn't too late. Sophie and Ethan freed the dogs, but the final confrontation had yet to come. The leader of the operation, Victor Hale, stepped out from the shadows, a sinister smile crossing his face. You think you can stop this? Victor sneered. This is just the beginning. Max, with Sophie by his side, took one last step forward. You've lost, Sophie said, her voice firm. This ends now. With one swift motion, Max leaped forward, taking down Victor in a flash. The men who had been working with him were no match for Max's fury, and soon, the operation was over. Days later, Sophie and Max stood at a memorial for the fallen K9s, those who had been exploited, those who had given everything. Max sat at her side, a proud and loyal companion. Sophie knew their journey wasn't over, but together, they had uncovered the truth. Together, they had freed not just Max, but all those who had been controlled and silenced. And as they walked into the sunset, Sophie whispered to Max, "We did it. We are free. And so are you." Max barked once in agreement, as if to say that they had both found redemption, and that their story was just beginning. This story explores the deep bond between a young girl, Sophie, and a dog, Max, who was once a trained K9 officer. Their journey together highlights themes of loyalty, trust, and the struggle for freedom. It sheds light on the consequences of a past shrouded in secrecy and exploitation, while illustrating the resilience of those who seek redemption and justice. The story reminds us that no matter the challenges or the pain we've experienced, every individual, whether human or animal, deserves to be free from oppression. It speaks to the importance of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem insurmountable, and the value of loyalty and compassion in the face of danger. We invite you to share your thoughts and feelings about this story by liking this video, commenting below, and sharing it with others. Your interaction helps us create more meaningful content that resonates with you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next inspiring story. Every like, comment, and share is a great motivation for us to continue creating better stories. Thank you once again for your time and support. We are so grateful for every one of you. Stay tuned for more heartfelt stories, and remember, you are always welcome to share your thoughts and emotions with us. See you in the next video.